Greetings from Tokyo. This is Daisuke, and I am very thrilled and honored today because we are joined by another great guest, a wonderful person. And a if you are a visitor to this channel, and if you have seen a number of videos, chances are you will recognize this gentleman, our next guest, as being a dear friend of this channel, a dear friend of mine, and a dear friend of all of us. And this is the one, the only Mr. Jared Wignall. So, Jared, welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be able to talk to you this way, not just through chatting and comments and messages. It's really cool.
Yeah, I know I feel like we've known each other for a long time, but this is one of those rare occasions where we can speak virtually, but still we can see each other's faces and hear our the voices in real time. So
Yeah, it's really cool. So glad technology has advanced to where we're all able to do this. Even to sort of meet people who we've talked to quite a bit, and then have an opportunity to now actually talk to them in real time, as you say.
oh, definitely, and thank goodness, because it is now affording me the wonderful chance to speak with you in person, face to face, at long last. So, Jared, it's a real pleasure, and I want to start just in case anyone is meeting you for the first time. I just want to say that well, first of all, let me say once again, thank you so much. You know, you have been so like a huge support for me in this channel. You have been a great friend, and you have been watching the videos, I think, since the very early days. And since then, I think you've been commenting. For example, you've been commenting, I think, on more or less every video I think I've ever
Yeah.
done here. So I want to thank you so much. First of all, that really means a lot. I'm so honored to get to know you through those comments and to interact with you in that way. But just first of all, before I forget, I just want to say thank you so much
Well,
for everything that you've done for me here. It's really meant so much.
oh well, you're welcome. You make a lot of great content. I remember one of the first videos I saw was about Filmstruck that you talked about, that I noticed, and I just watched other videos you've made previously from that and since, and I really enjoyed what you've done, especially since I collect quite a bit of Criterion movies too. So there was sort of something we could talk about on that basis, and then sort of just grew from there. And that was I've met some of the other people you've talked to, through like comments, as well as also live streams, um, interacting with people. So that was, yeah, that's always cool. Interacting with you and others, and yeah, you have a lot to say about movies, and you've seen a lot of great films, and even some of the films I haven't seen that you have. The way you talk about them, really interest me, and some are on the Criterion Channel. Some I've been able to see. Some haven't been on the Criterion Channel yet for whatever reason, but hopefully they will be. And if they ever do end up on the Criterion Channel, I will definitely give it a look. And even if I don't like a certain movie, at least I saw it. So that's always a good thing. Especially with streaming these days, even if you're not able to get like a physical movie, you're able to see it in some way, which in this day and age with people who love movies, there's so many options, and that's always great uh, to have those options.
Thank you so much for that. And it's that's another thing too that I have to thank you for, which is in those comments that you provided to me, for example, on the criterion titles that I would talk about occasionally here. You would always be so great and kind of diligent as well, and very helpful, because you would help me, let me know whether the title was on the Criterion channel or not. And so that would be something very helpful to me, because I don't have that information directly. So so you're filling in that very important gap of information that I'm leaving open. So thank you so much for providing that that very great and important information every time. I really appreciate that, my friend.
You're welcome. I hope more places will get the Criterion channel. I know it's mostly in America primarily, maybe North America. I don't know if Canada gets it, but I don't want to say they definitely do. But yeah, if they don't, that's unfortunate. But hopefully it has a big enough audience here in America that they could hopefully think about branching out one day into other countries. I think you'd like a number of the movies that they have on the Criterion channel, because they even sometimes have movies that aren't in the Criterion collection, or if they were at one point, maybe like Laserdisc, sort of like a throwback. I remember once they had like a High Noon, because they had that on Laserdisc, uh, but haven't gotten it back in the collection since. So that was really cool to see. So occasionally they'll have something like High Noon, or I think Taxi Driver was once on there. So it's really cool. Like every so often you'll see something that isn't in the collection anymore, but at one point was. So uh, they every so often they have stuff like that on their service. Yeah, it's hopefully more people will be able to at one day get it, and if they don't live here in the U.S. Because I know there are many people around the world who love the Criterion collection, and it, sometimes it just starts out one place to see how that does. Then if it's popular, they branch out. Um, Hopefully that will happen one day worldwide.
I hope so too. Yeah, that would be really great, especially from personally speaking. That would be really great. I would look forward to that very much. But thank you so much as always, my friend. I really appreciate it. So I just wanted to say that to you directly. So and warmest regards as always.
Oh,
But as you say, this is the first time I think, or one of the first times we're getting to talk face to face. But definitely, it's the first time that we have the time like this, and for me to ask you these questions that I've always been wondering. And so, with that, let's get right to it, as the saying goes, which is, as you mentioned, you are a film fan and you are a film enthusiast, and you are also a collector of physical media. Although you say too that you do watch films in streaming form, and also before all this World Health Crisis pandemic stuff hit, you would also go to the theaters rather regularly. Based on our interactions with the comments, you would always share with me things that you saw in the theater recently, or things of that nature. So obviously you are a big film fan. I have to ask you, uh, just right now, what are some of those films, or what are some of those filmmakers that are keeping you busy of late?
well, I actually, speaking of the theater, I'm lucky enough to where the state I live in hasn't had to close since we reopened in May, and the theaters actually like reopened in July of last year. I know not everybody has as fortunate wherever they live. But I'm thankful for that. So, in terms of some of the films, recently on the big screen, I saw the Maltese Falcon for its 80th anniversary. Um, so that experience watching that on the big screen for the first time was incredible. Sort of got me back into the mood of watching more of John Huston movies as well as Humphrey Bogart films. Um, Also, but prior to that, on the big screen, I saw the 40th anniversary of Friday the 13th. I know you made a series of videos on that, and prior, I was able to see Tenet on the big screen uh, a few times, and that was an incredible experience. I enjoy Christopher Nolan's films. I know not everybody is a huge fan of Nolan. Some like his smaller stuff and wish he would go back to that. Others really enjoy his bigger budget movies, which understandable. I can see arguments for either of if one is more fond of early work of Nolan than some of his later work. But I just think he's really good. He's a really good director. He's somebody since I saw Batman Begins. I really got interested in his work. Granted, I was quite young when I saw that, but as I've gotten older, I've seen all of his movies, and yeah. And in terms of uh, the pandemic, of course, I rewatched some other films. I've mentioned how I'm a Star Wars fan, so rewatching some of those movies. Also rewatched Jaws recently and Reservoir Dogs recently. I just got in the mood. I wanted to watch some stuff I really enjoy but haven't watched in quite some time. And so films like those are what I have been recently watching in the last few weeks as well as months. Uh, but yeah, some of the stuff for big screen, if people are able to see it here in America, um, they have lineups for future classic films for like anniversaries or something. They're going to have a Citizen Kane re-released for its 80th anniversary later in the year. So I might have to see that as well. Like I saw Maltese Falcon, I might as well see Citizen Kane too.
That's amazing. That is really great. And you're watching these unbelievably amazing works. And sometimes you're watching them on the big screen, as you indicated, as those examples suggest. Of course, I'm so impressed. And that now naturally leads me to my next question, which is one of the ways I think it's really great for me to get to know someone is to hear a little bit about their maybe their childhoods or their growing up and how they discovered cinema and what were some of those important films for people growing up. So I'm so curious, my friend, about you. So maybe for anyone who is meeting you for the first time in particular, could you just give us a little bit about your background and who you are? And also, when you were growing up, what were some of those important films that you watched a lot or that were right important to you as a child, as a kid growing up? Could you just share a little bit about that with us? I'd love to hear about that, my friend.
Oh, sure. As I mentioned, Star Wars. That was a big. If those were big movies for me growing up. The original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. Um, Growing up, VHS days, and then eventually DVD came along, and I was able to get those. Um, some of the other films, like Batman, I've talked about some of the Batman films. The Adam West Batman movie, and also the TV show, and the Tim Burton Batman movies, the Joel Schumacher Batman movies. Uh, Also, some of the Universal horror films. I was actually quite a big fan of those growing up. So those quite a bit as a young age. At a young age, Jaws. As I mentioned also earlier, I love. Um, though I was 6 when I was first going to watch it for the first time. However, just before Alex Kittner got attacked, I turned the movie off because it really scared me. And I later, like when I was 10 years old, I was able to watch it all the way through, and I realized John Williams's music is what really freaked me out because I was also a big shark guy. I would watch documentaries and Shark Week every year, so I knew a good amount about sharks by the time I was like 6. Yeah, yeah, I would have been 6 and for the 25th anniversary. Um, and so being a big fan of sharks, I thought this would be a great movie for me to watch. And my mom had no problem with that. She knew I love sharks and she was there, but I was just very freaked out first time I saw that. And it took me like 4 years until I was got the courage to watch it again. And it was in the summer, so I was able to rewind because I had the tape at the time. VHS tape, and I was able to rewind it, and I was able to just see it right after. And the John Williams was also somebody who I learned early on his name because I was a fan of Star Wars and also Spielberg movies like E.T. also was a big movie I grew up with. Close Encounters of the Third Kind and also Jurassic Park. Uh, George Lucas, and Steven Spielberg. Um, some of those were some of the early filmmakers who I definitely knew in terms of directing, even before I properly really knew what a director was. And I heard of Hitchcock and Alfred Hitchcock, but at that sort of a young of an age, a movie like Psycho or something, it probably wasn't all that appropriate for a young kid to watch. Where with something like Jaws might be quite intense, but if I have a love for sharks, my mom didn't think that was a totally a horrible thing for me to watch Jaws. I've seen reenactments of actual shark attacks, and more could be more graphic in the '90s and early 2000s than say what Jaws showed. Jaws has a lot of imagination, so due to the fact that the shark didn't work most of the time. And also the Universal monsters. I love the Wolfman, Creature from the Black Lagoon, Dracula, Frankenstein. Those were some of my early horror films that I saw. Of course, Jaws is technically a horror movie, but that freaked me out quite a bit. So I didn't watch that for some years. But I think I kind of graduated from the Universal monsters and then to other horror films, like being able to watch Jaws, and then later saw The Silence of the Lambs. Um, and I actually really enjoy horror films quite a bit. And I think the Universal monster movies sort of helped me with that. And I think those are some good movies to watch at a fairly young age because they're not too intense. Um, and that could get people into horror movies sort of like gradually as each film progresses. Sometimes they get a bit darker, and that kind of makes sense. As you get older, you will watch stuff that gets darker, and I thought that was actually in looking back, that's probably a great thing for me. And I also saw like the Phantom of the Opera with Lon Chaney. That was like one of my first silent films I ever saw, and I, I I really love that movie. Uh, and he was an incredible actor, and Lon Chaney Jr. Of course, and Boris Karloff, and Bela Lugosi. Yeah, all of those guys are all iconic and did great work in those films and also outside of those movies too. But they all played like very iconic parts. So I guess stereotyping is it's a real thing and can be hard to break out for people like in those certain roles. But uh, I always admired those who really embraced that. Might not have liked their stereotyped, but they kind of embrace it too. Um, I know Adam West embraced being Batman, uh, though for a period he was sort of kind of resentful because he wasn't able to do more like dramatic work that he did prior to Batman. But he embraced it and he just loved it, and he had a huge following. And people like that who get pigeonholed into like one role or a specific type of films, that even if they kind of uh, uh, sort of have a little bit of a resentment to it for a bit, they kind of turn around on it because it's like that's what kind of helped make them really more popular than they were before and keeps people talking about them. So what might have at one point been seen as a negative sort of is like a positive in the end. And films and roles were people that I would watch quite a bit because I would also sort of follow like certain actors, like hearing somebody was in a movie, like, oh, I like the Wolfman. Oh, Lon Chaney's in this, Junior's in this. Oh, I'll watch that. And even if the movie isn't necessarily say good, there was something kind of fun about watching it, like just seeing what else they did. And I think that kind of helps broaden people's horizons. Like, oh, you like somebody in this movie. Well, what else did they do? And as I got older, I knew more about who directors were, beyond George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. So that kind of helped broaden my uh, uh, library of films. So, sort of started like from Star Wars and Spielberg films and Universal horror films and just sort of, branched out from there.
That is that is so cool. That is really cool. I'm fascinated by a number of things off the top, which is, for example, so you mentioned in there, for instance, how you had seen Jaws at 6 years old for its 25th anniversary, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I was putting, as you said that, I was just trying to make the calculation in my head, pardon me, about just your age and your generation, as it were. And then, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but so based on that, the films that you were talking about, like Jaws, even maybe Jurassic Park, although that might be around this, I'm not sure exactly, but other films like Universal Horror or certainly the Star Wars films, at least, the original trilogy is concerned. So many of these films that you were speaking about are films that were made before you were born, correct?
Yeah. And Jurassic Park came out the year before I was born. So, yeah. So I was born 94. So, yeah, I grew up on a lot of old movies. Uh, the first proper R-rated film I actually remember seeing from beginning to end was The Shawshank Redemption, and I watched that with my mom. And it was like on like HBO or something where there was no commercials and it wasn't censored. So, and that was because like The Green Mile was coming out. So that was made by Frank Darabont, and it was also another Stephen King story. So they thought like we should play that too before this movie comes out. And you know, and I also remember months later watching The Green Mile too. So I was like 5, almost 6, near around the time I saw Jaws. But yeah, I didn't see too many R-rated movies at that age. Those were sort of exceptions because my mom really enjoyed The Shawshank Redemption. So, and there wasn't anything all that horrible that happened in The Shawshank Redemption either. That would be terrible if I saw it. The most would be like bad language that, you know, obviously I shouldn't say, especially at that age. But uh, yeah, uh, yeah, for the most part, it was. I did see new movies, but a lot of the movies I really love from back when I was a childhood that I still love now were movies before I was born. Um, like you mentioned, yeah, it's I saw so many movies growing up, and I noticed my family really loves movies. Also, I live in Iowa, and so in the winter when didn't have to go to school, they're sort of stuck at home if there was like a snow day. So it's like, what else to do but watch movies or something? So that sort of helped uh, me be more into movies.
Wow, that is, thank you so much. This is really cool because this you're obviously uh you are obviously in love with film, and it sounds too that you got a lot of this love or this shared experience with your family, and also that enabled you, as you say, to watch films that were not just part of your time growing up, the films that were being released after you were born, for example, but also the films that came prior. You know, you mentioned Shawshank Redemption just there, and you also mentioned other films that you'd seen in the theater. This is fantastic, my friend.
Mhm.
This is excellent. And so let me ask you the flip side, which is, so what were some of those films that you were really into that were released after you were born? So from, what would it be, the mid 90s onwards? You had mentioned, I think, for example, the prequel trilogy, the Star Wars prequel trilogy as well. Which, so the first one would have been in the late 90s, right?
Yes.
So that would have been afterwards, and the rest of the prequel films came after that, of course. And also, you mentioned Batman, but there are those. Are there any other examples of films that you were really into that came afterwards?
Oh yeah. I saw also many like Pixar films. You know, Toy Story came out when I was one. I grew up with that fondly, and I remember seeing Toy Story 2 and really enjoying that. And some of the other Pixar films that have come out, you know, since. I remember A Bug's Life in the '90s also. Um, One of the first films I remember seeing when I talked to this about you was Doctor Doolittle with Eddie Murphy in '98. Though, excuse me. Thinking back, I did see a movie in IMAX when I was like 3 in Florida. Like my family took a vacation in Florida, and it was a huge IMAX theater. I don't remember the name, but I remember like it was like a nature documentary about like went over the Grand Canyon and went underwater and saw like so many like fish and sharks and other animals, and just a cool nature documentary. But I only remember sort of images of what I'm sort of describing. But the first proper movie I really loved also was Doctor Doolittle. I think part of that was also because it was one of my first films I saw on the big screen, and so that made a huge impact on me. Um, yeah, you know, it might not be one of the, you know, it may not be technically better than the original Doctor Doolittle, but for me, not having seen the original at that point, I really love that, and that sort of helped introduce me to Eddie Murphy. And then he was later in, you know, Shrek as Donkey, and that just sort of helped propel my enjoyment of Eddie Murphy and what he was doing. And also, I then later, as I got older, saw some of his other films, like from the '80s, um, which, you know, perhaps at that time might not have been appropriate for me to watch. uh, in terms of like some of the inappropriate humor. But I saw uh, some of his later films too, and I enjoyed those. Maybe in retrospective, like Daddy daycare, day camp. Maybe that wasn't like, or no, not him. That was Steve Martin. I remember Steve Martin too in some various films. Like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles was also another big one every year. Just sort of thinking of so many movies right now. Apologies for that, but uh, yeah, Steve. Of course, that was a movie like for Thanksgiving time. But of course, there's that one part. I remember when I was really young. Why is this rated R? And then that one famous scene in the. How do you get so angry at the car rental place? And it's like, oh, that's why it's rated R. Okay, well, because up until that point, it wasn't really all that bad. It could have been like a PG-13 film at that point. Though I guess there were some now looking back, like images of naked women in that taxi driver's car when they're going to that first like proper motel. But those were sort of also, I guess you could see like seen quick and maybe not be able to fully understand like, wait, what? There's all this stuff in there, and uh, kind of goes a bit fast. So one might not be able to properly. It was only years later that I realized there was pictures of naked women, and I didn't. Of course, at a young age like that, watching the movie, I didn't notice that initially. So I picked up on why it was rated R very quickly once that scene came up. But you know, people like Eddie Murphy and Steve Martin, they had done films that were like sort of like family movies, or that could be seen with the family, if perhaps not seen specifically as a advertised as a family film, but for something for all everybody in the family could watch, like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Because outside of like that one scene, it's not all that of a horrible film in terms of the content of like kids shouldn't watch this. It's like that one scene really alone is why it was rated R. Um, Also, Christmas Vacation is also another big film I saw growing up. Um, but and Chevy Chase also. So there's definitely people who I would see in films and really love. Um, I guess the Shrek films, I did watch Shrek 1 and 2 and 3. Um, Obviously, Tom Hanks from Toy Story. Saw like Castaway when I was around also age 6, and I I enjoyed that, though that's quite of a bit more of an intense movie, but I enjoyed it quite well. Um, I remember later on from also the year 2000, like probably some years later, saw Gladiator. I didn't see it in 2000, but I saw it like maybe like 5 years later when I was about 11 years old. So around like the time Revenge of the Sith and Batman Begins, I saw it on like HBO or one of those channels that and that's another movie I really enjoyed all these years later. So from that on, I kind of certain films just sort of stayed with me, even if I saw them a bit later than they initially came out, because either I was too young to see it, or maybe it just wasn't on my radar at the time. But there were certainly many movies that I grew up with watching that came after I was born, and also those I saw before I was that came out before I was born. Um, so I really uh, enjoyed many of those movies, and you mentioned how you would rent videotapes quite a bit, and I remember doing that too. I didn't do that too many times as much as perhaps some people did, but I do remember going to like Blockbuster and renting some tapes. One was a I remember renting a lot. It was a animated series of The Mask, which I loved. The Mask, the movie The Mask, and also Jim Carrey was also another big person I watched growing up. Uh, yeah, that's there's so
Yeah.
many great movies and people in in those movies that I just kind of watched as I got older because they're really I really enjoyed their work in whatever films I saw at an early age, and then that helped lead me to see what they did either like before I was born. Um, of course, though, Steve Martin did Planes, Trains, and Automobiles before I was born, but I grew up with that. So, um, and John Candy, also another incredible actor who's unfortunately no longer with us. Um, Spaceballs, and so many other great films he did. Uh, yeah.
That's great. Yeah, you're mentioning so many here. I you just mentioned John Candy and Spaceballs. I saw that I was a kid. I saw that in the theater when it was first released. It was amazing. And another favorite of mine was like like Uncle Buck, and
Mm.
also the what, oh gosh, the there's there's oh, you mentioned Jim Carrey and The Mask. I saw that in the theater too when it was released, and Cameron Diaz. I remember at the time it was a that was a really big deal because this was one of the first major roles of Cameron Diaz, if I recall correctly, and also it was the beginning of that run of the stardom of Jim Carrey. I think before that it was Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, which was a huge surprise hit, if I recall, and then following up with films. This was before he did Batman Forever, and so The Mask came out, and I was really excited, and I saw that in the theater. It was really fun. It was really a fun time. So
Uh,
that's
that yeah, that's what I would love to see on the big screen.
yeah. Oh, it was
Yeah,
fun. If I recall correctly, it was maybe a matinee show or something, and so it wasn't a full packed crowd of a theater at the time I saw it. But the people that were there were really into it. They were laughing, and it was. I would say for me, it was more of a it wasn't like a laugh out loud type of thing for the most part, but it was more like a fantasy superhero type of film with a lot of joke. You know what I mean? That's the tone of
yeah,
it, and so it felt a lot like a lot of fun. It really led really nicely, I think, to what he would do with Batman, and so. But I actually, speaking of Jim Carrey and speaking of Batman,
hmm
I have to ask you now, which is the one of the things that I know that you're really, really into is the Batman films. And you mentioned it earlier in our discussion today. You mentioned watching, for instance, the Tim Burton films. You also mentioned watching the TV show and Adam West, and also the Batman movie that he did. Um, and let me say here too that there are some really great ones. I love that series, by the way, and I love the movie as well. And there's a moment, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a particular moment where Adam West's Batman discovers something about someone else's identity, and there's a moment where he's just shocked or something, and then there's a bit of music that plays, and that is a really powerful dramatic moment
yeah,
because yeah, for a moment, and I don't want to get too much into it, but for a moment his whole world is shattered in that brief moment of realization. But that's kind of a that's I should talk more about that film. That is a one that I saw over and over again as a kid. But yeah, this is Batman, the world of Batman, and so. You mentioned Christopher Nolan. You mentioned watching Batman Begins, but you've also mentioned in the comments, in many a comment, about your love of the trilogy, the Dark Knight trilogy, and that comes also in the period after you were born, and so in this quote unquote modern era. Of course, now we have more Batman films, more cinematic
Mhm.
representations and expressions of this character. But I have to ask you now. So Batman. So what are some of those Batman films that really stick with you? What are some of those moments of Batman that really stick with you? And let's say from here on, you're free to talk specific spoilers if you want. Let's get right into it. So Batman, my dear friend.
Uh, yeah, I just really love the character since I was a kid with, beginning with Adam West, seeing that show and really loving it. And which then years later I saw the movie because I didn't see the movie initially until some time later because I saw Batman with Tim Burton's first in terms of a feature length film with Batman. But before that, I know I saw Adam West's Batman, which at a very young age, like I was probably like 2 or so. That's probably a very appropriate sort of thing for like a 2-year old or so to gravitate towards Batman. No, who knows? I probably would have really loved Tim Burton's Batman if I saw that first. Um, but I watched, remembering watching Jack, that helped expose me to Jack Nicholson. And he's an incredible actor. And also, not long after Batman, I saw Beetlejuice, so that gave me more exposure of Michael Keaton and Tim Burton. Um, Tim Burton was also somebody I knew early on because of like the Batman films and Beetlejuice and also Mars Attacks, which I enjoy quite a bit. Sort of like a yeah, it's sort of like a cult film. Um, but yeah, but the look of Burton's Batman really looked like a comic book, which I think helps with the appeal of that film for many, especially those who love the comic books. And I got into the comic books after like the Batman show and seeing those movies. So like 3 or 4, I started reading the comics, um, and this might be embarrassing to say, but I used to have like Batman pajamas and stuff because that's how much I love Batman. But that might be embarrassing to say, but I think a lot of I think there's so many who have had similar instances where if they like Batman or Superman or Spider-Man or whatever like comic book character or superhero, I'm sure they had like some sort of like pajamas at one point or bed sheets or something. So that's not too embarrassing, but I guess to say. But um, yeah, I also saw talking about Jim Carrey, Batman Forever also helped expose me more to Jim Carrey than just like The Mask and Ace Ventura. Um, and Dumb and Dumber, which also came out the same year as those other two films. But yeah, Batman Forever was a film that I remember seeing, and of course, retrospectively looking back, it's like Joel Schumacher wanted a very dark film, but because of the backlash of Batman Returns, like of how dark that film got, and like with the Penguin and Catwoman, and that sort of led the exit of Tim Burton and uh, Michael Keaton, because Keaton didn't want to do it without Burton, which is something like what Christian Bale says with Batman. Like he would return if Nolan returned or gave his blessing of anything. Like there's some because there's going to do some more Batman stuff, but there's going to be like a multiverse. Like Michael Keaton will return as Batman and also Ben Affleck, and there's been some talk about getting Christian Bale in this big world. But he'll only do it if Nolan says he's fine with that. Like if he gives his blessing, essentially, then Christian Bale will have no problems coming back because, well, his Batman director said it's fine. Um, so that'll be definitely interesting in terms of future Batmans. See how they incorporate the Michael Keaton Batman into this new like big multiverse uh, that they're gonna add, and if they're able to get someone like Christian Bale into it, and maybe Robert Pattinson. I haven't heard much about that. I've heard that that's going to be its own thing, but who knows? Things can happen from now until the film comes out. that's going to all take place in. Um, and I also saw, Batman and Robin, which isn't the most beloved Batman film. Um, but there are some moments where it's like, there's some people like, you can laugh at it and have fun with Batman and Robin, which is true. Um, and I found watching the behind the scenes of the films kind of makes like, you know, Batman and Robin a bit more interesting to for me, because I went from at one point really loving that film to not loving it so much. And I don't hate Batman and Robin, honestly. I actually enjoy, all the various Batman films to a good degree. Some more than others, but I definitely, even though the Tim Burton's first Batman may not be my favorite, it does have a special place in my heart because it's like the first one Batman film I ever saw. So even if it's not my favorite, I'm like I just really enjoy that movie. Uh, Jack Nicholson and Michael Keaton clashing was really good. And then later we got Christian Bale and Heath Ledger, in The Dark Knight, which I remember seeing Batman Begins, and at the end when Commissioner Gordon gives, or not Commissioner at that point, but Gordon gives Batman the card and he flips it over and it's the Joker. There's sort of like this, people didn't gasp or anything in the theater when I saw it when I was like 11, but the theater really got quiet for a brief moment when that happened. Like if there's a sequel, the Joker is going to come up, and then of course, like who's going to be the Joker? And then we got that 3 years later in The Dark Knight, and Heath Ledger did a great job. I know he wasn't totally sure about being the Joker because of Jack Nicholson and how great he did that part. And that was a more serious Joker than say like Cesar Romero. Cesar Romero did a fine job for that particular series and the movie that he did. But Jack Nicholson's was quite darker, which was understandable because people kind of wanted to see Batman darker. And there was the animated show in the 90s. And there was like The Mask of the Phantasm, which I did see. Thought that was a very good film. Um, though one thing I noticed is like with the animated series, I enjoyed the villains more, and I'm somebody who likes the hero more. And so when I found the villains to be more interesting than Batman on the Batman animated series, that kind of took me a bit out of that show. So I don't enjoy that show as much, but I do enjoy rewatching it every so often. It is a very well done show. Mark Hamill's Joker is really great. The introduction of Harley Quinn, who is a huge character now. So there is definitely importance of that show. Kevin Conroy does a very fine job voicing Batman. And yeah, so there's a lot of things like since like the Tim Burton films with Batman that came from it. And then so when Nolan is able to get Batman and do it the way he wanted it, you have Liam Neeson, who at my age, known for Qui-Gon Jinn amongst from Star Wars, and he's sort of playing another mentor type role, only to flip that on its head and he's not really a good guy that we thought. So that was a cool twist, and seeing how that was executed, I enjoyed that. Skipping a bit around, but that's just something I really liked. That I guess some of the other previous Batman films didn't have, either because they didn't think, like the people writing the movie and those directing didn't think of any sort of like twist like that. But then again, those movies might not have benefited from such a twist. It might have come out of left field if not executed well. But with Batman Begins, that definitely helped, I think, for that film, because it kind of helped make this point from the beginning of the film of the League of Shadows to come back into the circle after we've seen Bruce Wayne being Batman for a while. And then this thread with the Scarecrow, oh, that's a larger point to Ra's al Ghul, who actually is not dead like thought before. So I thought that was really good. The Dark Knight, you know, push that further and see what the consequences in a way of Batman has on Gotham City, which um, you know like how Batman affects Gotham. Like there's a lot of good, but there could be some bad. Like the Joker comes out of Batman in a way because of Batman's presence that allows in his mind the Joker to be exist. Like if he didn't, if he wasn't Batman, maybe the Joker would not have ever uh, come about. But then again, maybe he would have, regardless. So it's just perhaps the Joker could be using Batman as sort of I guess, an excuse for being there, even though he might have always been there. Just might have operated differently, and causing chaos and fear, like the Joker often does. So they definitely, I think, got that right in the Dark Knight. And of course, the inspirations Nolan had for like Heat is very present in The Dark Knight. And I really enjoyed Heat, and I know you did too with the live stream you did months ago, which was really good and fun to participate in. Um, and one thing I like about Nolan's trilogy is he never really planned a trilogy from the outset. I mean, he kind of early on thought about flirting with the idea of doing 3 movies, and um, Emma Thomas, as Christopher Nolan's wife, said that in a documentary, he kind of had an idea of where he would have liked to have seen Bruce Wayne end up. Though whether or not we see at the end of The Dark Knight Rises if that was where he wanted Bruce Wayne to end up at is another question, I guess. It's not really ever answered. Then again, I don't think it's something Nolan has ever been asked before. So that's something that is up in the air, I guess, with how The Dark Knight Rises ends. And another thing I like about that trilogy is it's really a Bruce Wayne story. And prior to that, it's sort of like Batman is in the forefront quite a bit. You know, not that Bruce Wayne doesn't have many scenes, but some of the more interesting scenes with him is when he's Batman. I think the Dark Knight trilogy was able to make Bruce Wayne's scenes just as interesting as Batman's scenes, maybe a bit more effective than previous incarnations of the character, perhaps. At least for me. And the version that Nolan presented was sort of a version I kind of wanted to see in terms of the tone, like the dark tone that I had read in the comics. And there's a sort of a grittiness that I also really liked to it that sort of maybe as over time sort of manifested in sort of my film choices of what I like. I really enjoy Taxi Driver. That's kind of a dark, gritty film. And also that film served as sort of an inspiration for Joker, the new film. So sort of in a way, that sort of tone was sort of in my mind of what I kind of wanted to see. And like Burton, I think, was inching his way closer to that, but unfortunately, because of Batman Returns' very mixed reception, it didn't. He didn't get to fully realize that. Nolan was able to do that though, and that's great. And I also enjoyed the Bane in The Dark Knight Rises. Tom Hardy's performance really elevates that character. I know the twist at the end of The Dark Knight Rises isn't a big thing that a whole lot of people enjoy, but I kind of liked it in an extent. In that, I kind of saw it coming early on, but just how it affected Bruce Wayne is, I think, why I really like it, because he didn't expect Miranda Tate to be working with uh, Bane, which I think there is a bit of a misconception that Bane works for her. It seems like they're working together because, if you remember, she says to him, "Don't kill him. He needs to like suffer and realize he has failed. Like everything he did was basically for nothing." And as soon as she's gone, he says, "We both know I have to kill you now." And he pushes him to the ground and is about to shoot him in the head. But then, of course, Catwoman shows up and saves him. I know there are people who aren't too fond of Bane's demise, which, while I have no real problem with, I can definitely understand that. I understand, like, with a villain like Bane, like, that's the way he goes out. But recollecting earlier, Selena Kyle seems to be very, very feels really bad about what she did to Bruce Wayne because she had no clue he was Batman. So when she finds out, it's like there's this guilt that she has, and so here's a chance to sort of redeem herself and save him. And he, I kind of liked that angle, but I will agree that perhaps his demise could have been done better. But with what was set up, I guess earlier in the movie, and Selena Kyle feeling, and you're able to see that she does feel guilty for what she did to Bruce Wayne. It kind of makes sense narratively for me, and I don't have a huge issue with that. I also like how The Dark Knight Rises sort of comes full circle with Batman Begins, with the League of Shadows, and this League of Shadows seem to be a bit more brutal than, say, before. Like, and again, with the leadership of Bane, it's kind of expected.
Yeah, it's no longer the League of Shadows. It's, according to Bane, it's the "I'm the League of Shadows," right? Yeah, yeah. So it's
Yeah,
even in his voice, it's changed to something sounding more sinister. Yes, I've come to fulfill Ra's al Ghul's destiny. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yes, and
yeah.
I remember seeing that film opening night, and then the brutality of how he just demolishes Batman was just so, man. But then I also had read the comics that inspired that big fight, so I was kind of happy to see that as well, because it's like many people say that the Nolan films don't really take inspiration from the comics. He takes certain inspirations and sprinkles them out throughout his films, but I thought that was one that was a very direct inspiration. Clearly, he basically maybe not breaks his back, but he definitely injures it to where he's not really able to move without at least hurting. And I know some of the methods that was used, people question how that could work, but though I guess to be fair, they never do say his back is fully healed, so it's just going to make it better. So he's able to like be able to begin to get the strength to walk again, and it's not going to hurt as much. Um, there's a lot of things in the trilogy, like how at the end that kind of comes full circle, which I just enjoyed, because in franchises today we don't see too many coming full circles as much as perhaps they used to do when a franchise would end. Um, so I think that's another reason I enjoyed the Dark Knight trilogy and Rises in particular. Um, there's certain things set up that in like the early installments that come back into fruition at the end, which I quite enjoyed. Um, uh, and it was also a fun experience to see Batman on the big screen for the first time with Batman Begins, and then continue that all the way to the Dark Knight Rises. That was always fun for me growing up, and essentially becoming an adult, because I was 18 when the Dark Knight Rises came out. So I went from being pre-teen to my teenage years, which um, was really fun. And if I ever had the chance to see into the other movies on the big screen, like Batman '89, I would definitely go and see it. Though some of the re-releases they've had is in certain select cities, and where I live, it's nowhere near me. So fortunately, I wasn't able to see like Batman '89, but that would be definitely a film that would be cool to see on the big screen. I know siblings I have remember watching that on the big screen and loving it, and I'm like, the excitement they kind of share was sort of mine for Batman Begins. That was like my first theatrical experience for Batman, and yeah,
Yeah, it was. Thank you so much. The '89 Batman, that was huge. I can't tell, as a kid, just the kind of shockwaves that it sent, and the buildup and the merchandising and everything. It was Batman. It was a phenomenon. I remember.
yeah,
And also, you mentioned Batman Return. You mentioned Tim Burton. Before I forget, thank you very much for mentioning Mars Attacks. I saw that in the theater
well,
too. I love Mars Attacks. I never understood. I guess I do maybe, but I love it, and I thought that was a great time. I loved it then. I loved it now, and it has that funny kind of comic book tone. It's got that Doctor Strangelove vibe to it. It's got the great the cameos and who's gonna live, who's gonna die. That the disaster movie, monster invasion, alien invasion, epic sweep. That's also laugh out loud funny. It's a great film,
yeah,
and that was when I saw I saw a lot of Tim Burton films in the theater when they were released. I saw Ed Wood in the theater as well, and Batman. Mentioned Batman and Batman Returns. This is so great because you mentioned how the um the Christopher Nolan films are focusing in on the Bruce Wayne character, which I agree with 100%. They definitely are. Batman is a very important component of the Bruce Wayne character, as we know.
hmm,
But I would suggest too, right? Which I think you were also suggesting, which is Batman Returns. I would argue is also very much focused in on the Bruce Wayne character. There are some moments in Batman Returns where we have Michael Keaton, right, Bruce Wayne, Batman, and a lot of the really key moments in that film happen with him as Bruce Wayne, right? A
yeah,
lot of the key moments. One of my favorite is the masquerade ball. That's a whole play on the mask and the unmasking and and
yeah,
and the discovery and the situation, the recalibration of the characters, Shrek and Selena Kyle and Batman and the thing with the whole thing with the confrontation, and it's an unmasking, and it's a confrontation taking place with and without masks, and I found that to be so much a story about Bruce Wayne, and all the
mhm,
stuff that happens is really about Bruce Wayne. The Batman stuff is like with the Penguin,
mhm,
and that's how it all comes together. I feel, which is it's still a great moment. I love the Penguin in that, and I love how
yeah,
the Penguin is the most sympathetic character in many ways, and so there's a real kind of tragedy in the air about that
mhm,
character. But
yeah,
yeah, that's and you mentioned too about the Nolan trilogy and the demise of Bane. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I love your comment about it because what it does is it reminds me. And please disagree if you think what I'm saying is not correct, but it reminds me that for the most part in the past Nolan films, when we're talking about how the main villains end up, for the most part, they all end up in pretty kind of almost anticlimactic ways, kinda,
mhm,
right? Like the
mhm,
first Ra's al Ghul at the very beginning, the Ken Watanabe Ra's al Ghul, he
yes,
kind of is there, and then he's suddenly like, right? And so
yeah,
okay, and then of course there's the Scarecrow. And we find
mhm,
out what happens to him. I mean, he has a great buildup in the first film, but then when you get to the second film, it's like, oh,
yeah,
okay, all right,
the,
yeah,
he's like a drug dealer.
yeah, and then he's just and his voice isn't changed anymore, right? His voice was different in Batman because I guess maybe the battery ran out in his voice box. I don't know, but
Yeah,
right? But he's like, oh, I'm okay. I'm now arrested and waiting here next to the
To
car
be,
or something. I mean, it's a great buildup, and also arguably too, like Two-Face,
hmm,
the Joker. There was this great setup for what could have been, but
yeah,
there wasn't that. I mean, well, maybe there's some argument to be made about that, but my point is that even with in that kind of context, we can see how the villains as they're dispatched in the Nolan universe is it's pretty much like kind of true to life. I don't know if that's really accurate, but my point is that
mhm,
it's not for the sake of a huge showdown. Maybe
yeah,
Ra's al Ghul, Liam Neeson is the exception to that with the train at the end,
yeah,
but still, there's a sense of they're there and then boom, they're just that's just what happens. And even with Two-Face, there's a bit of a buildup, but it's very quick and it ends. You know what I mean? How what happens to his character at in Dark Knight, but that
yeah,
seems to be consistent with the Bane character's resolution seems to be consistent
yeah.
with it. I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't really thought of that too much, but that is a good point that there is a lot of anticlimactic, which does sort of echo to real life since his films are more realistic. Um, he thinks they're uh, like more hyper realistic. Like there's still a bit of a theatricality to them, so there's like not completely real, but more realistic than like Tim Burton's Batman or Joel Schumacher's. But I really like that. Yeah, that gave me something to think about. Yeah, there's a lot of anticlimactic thing. Like you think there's going to be this huge battle, and Liam Neeson's Bras al Ghul does get that, but like with the Joker, whether or not there was ever going to be a follow up with the Joker, Nolan, like there's earliest like in like late 2012 or not 12 2008, around the time The Dark Knight was coming out on DVD and Blu-ray. Like Nolan had already, I guess, finished like a potential treatment for a third movie, and then he went and did Inception, like which he kind of did like in between Batman movies. He did like The Prestige, and then he did Inception. Um, so it like I know a lot of people thought maybe the Joker would have been in another movie, but there was never a big guarantee Nolan would get to do any movies after Batman Begins. He wanted to make the best he could make, and then have the ending sort of like it kind of endure and want the audience to want more, which I think really helps quite a bit as opposed to just outright setting up a sequel. Like if the Dark Knight never happened, it's like, well, there was Batman Begins, and it's like, who would the Joker have been? What would have happened? We get to have that up in our minds, like after the Dark Knight, what happens to Batman? Is he going to be permanently the villain, or is he also, or will something happen and that all will be worked out? Of course, in the Dark Knight Rises, we see what happens. He's still seen as the bad guy, he's taking the fall, and I think that really helps sort of cement quite a bit to Bruce Wayne how he how that's really affected him overall for all those years and all that time training to be Batman, then being Batman, and then sort of gone in an instant because he accidentally killed Harvey Dent when he was Two Face, and but he was such a symbol of hope that people you know looked towards, and he didn't want that to be undone and all the bad guys get out because oh well he was no better than them essentially would be how that would have been seen. Joker sure would have been locked away in like Arkham or whatever, um, but because of the unfortunate passing of Heath Ledger, any potential uh, sequel uh, for the with the Joker never was, I guess, in Nolan's mind since he never really plans out sequels, so he never intended a possible future, and he died prior to the release of The Dark Knight, so there wasn't really any brief moment of well, we might have him again in a third film um, if we ever decide to make another film. Um, uh, And I'm glad they did a third film because I'm like I like the end of that trilogy. Um, how Bruce Wayne's story comes to an end. I know there are people who like, oh, it's not like in the comics where he's Batman always. It's like, well, this is again more of a realistic Batman, but I guess because of that, there are some people who don't like that Batman because it is realistic. Um, but I think there's enough room for a realistic Batman like Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne Batman, and there's also like Michael Keaton's Batman and Bruce Wayne and Ben Affleck's. It's like there's so many at this point you could pick and choose what your favorite is. And with Batman Returns, yeah, upon thinking, there was a lot of Bruce Wayne in that film. I found his chemistry with Michelle Pfeiffer to be better than his chemistry with Kim Basinger. I think I just liked how the Michelle Pfeiffer and him played off of each other very well. There's just something about them uh, as Selena Kyle and Bruce Wayne that just really meshed and really well. And maybe that's because like they're both friends and potentially more than friends, but that doesn't really happen. But then they're also enemies, and so maybe it's that complexity that I also liked. How there's an attraction, but there's also the fact that they're also fighting against each other at the same time. And Kim Basinger and Batman didn't, and Michael Keaton obviously didn't have that in the first Batman because the Joker was the enemy. There was no real dynamic for anything of that nature to happen. But yeah, that's a good point that Bruce Wayne does have more screen time in Batman Returns than in Batman. Um, and I remember Adam West said he wanted one of the reasons he wanted the Batman film to be the way it was is because he wanted to be Bruce Wayne more. He thought Bruce Wayne was an interesting character and should have more screen time than like the show at that point had. It was mostly see Bruce Wayne at the beginning and maybe the end of the episode, but for the most part, it was Batman. And I think that's really cool how, even Tim Burton tried to give Bruce Wayne more screen time, when he had many villains like Penguin and Catwoman. Um, and I guess by the time Christopher Nolan was able to do that, he was able to just have Bruce Wayne in there as much as he felt the story needed. Um, a lot of people talk about how Val Kilmer could have been an incredible Batman if he was able to do it more. And I think there is a point there. Like he does a fine job, though. With Batman Forever, the tone is quite jarring at places. One moment it's very serious, but then it's very goofy, and of course Jim Carrey is the Riddler, but then also Two-Face is also a bit out there. He does have moments of some seriousness and potential darkness, but that's then juxtaposed with his Two-Face persona being and some people compare him to like maybe like the Joker, and so like some people criticize his performance not being like faithful to Two-Face. But then again, that could also be possibly for studio interference, wanting a more child friendly and not the dark tone that, because Joel Schumacher did like the Lost Boys and Falling Down and some serious dark films. And so from those movies, you can kind of see where he might have wanted Batman. But then, of course, due to what people thought of the mixed reaction of Batman Returns, we need a more kid friendly Batman. Though, Batman Returns was PG-13, but because there's like Happy Meal toys, that gave the impression that this was a kid's film and not so much.
Yeah, there was a backlash. As I say, I remember seeing these films as a kid, and I remember Batman Returns. There was a kind of backlash, at least in certain circles of the media, the public media that I remember. And I think it was it Siskel and Ebert that one of them described as like looking into an inkwell. It was so dark, and there was a lot of talk about the violence in that film, with the penguin
Wow.
and like the nose and
Yeah.
and all this, and then there's a lot of talk too about what was perceived by some, at least in public comments made at the time, was the sexualization, and how this was very kind of graphic sexual depictions with Catwoman and Bruce Wayne in particular. But those, I think, were the reasons where we get a different change of trajectory into Batman Forever, which I also saw in the theater. That and Batman and Robin I saw in the theater too. Yeah, it was. Um, I'm so glad you mentioned Two-Face. That's the thing that I always try to give the films the benefit of the doubt, but one of the things I never could understand is the scene where they're attacking Wayne Manor, and Two-Face is in the hall and he's sitting down in a chair, and everything, all the chaos has happened. It cuts back to him occasionally and he's flipping his coin, remember? And
Hmm.
you know how the whole thing is that one side is I guess uncut, and the other side is scratched up. And the
Hmm.
whole thing is that if it comes up the scratched up surface, then that will give him the excuse to be the bad guy. And so he's
Yeah.
waiting and he's flipping the coin, and it comes up the good side, and he's disappointed. He's like, oh, ugh. And he
Yeah.
flips it, and cuts back to him later, and he flips it again. He's like disappointed. Oh no! And it cuts back to some cat, and it cuts back to him again. And he flips the coins and flips up to the scratch. Like, oh yes! And now this is an excuse to become the. I thought that was a terrible scene. I
Yeah.
never understood that. And it went to me, you mentioned it goes against the grain of the character of Toothface. I felt that was where it happened. Because
Yeah.
if it's the Two-Face that I understand him to be, he can be either side of that personality
Mhm.
equally at any given point. It just he needs something to give him a decision,
Yeah.
right? And if he
Yeah.
comes up the good side, that should give him the decision, or the ability for him to decide to be good, or his good persona.
Mhm.
But it was just like he was waiting, and so it just didn't happen. Maybe the argument could be made, maybe that his good side was being represented by the fact that he wasn't participating in the attack on Wayne Manor,
Yeah.
and he was just sitting there as a passive observer.
Mhm.
I don't know if I quite buy that. It's that's not enough. You know, the Harvey Dent character is this almost heroic character,
Yeah.
and it's his fall that is the most tragic thing about the character. I mean, it was captured so well in The Dark Knight, as you say,
Yeah.
and it was captured so well, I think, in Batman the Animated Series. I mean, you mentioned
Mhm.
too that the villain
Yeah.
backstories in the Batman animated series are one of the most fascinating aspects. I agree.
Mhm.
That's true for Two-Face in that series. That's true for what they did with Mr. Freeze. I mean,
Yes.
the very first appearance we saw of Mr. Freeze in the series. So
Mhm.
I thought that was really great. So that I could never wrap my head around that. I mean, other parts of Batman Forever I thought were really, really interesting and really visually delightful.
Mhm.
And the word I love the word uh, what is it? Surfs Up, Big Kahuna, and Joygasm. You know, these are some Riddler lines. You know, so
Yes.
and you know, the real game begins, and oh it you know, holy rusted metal Batman,
Yeah.
when they, you remember that line? Yeah.
Yes.
Robin's, oh, you know, huh? And Batman's like, huh, you know, oh, you know, the it's the metal, it's you know, it's rusty, it's all full of holes, you know, holy, you know, that was a great
Yeah.
moment. Yeah, but
Yeah.
and I love that, but again, you're right,
No.
there's some parts that just don't, there's some parts that work, there's some parts that I'm not sure, you know?
You
Yeah.
know, even though Batman and Robin is the most disliked of those because of how more it embraced the child-friendly aspect, um, at least with that, it's more tonally consistent. You know, even if it's a bit of a disappointment for people who enjoyed the dark stuff that the other three had. The third film of that series was like there is dark stuff and there's some light kind of goofy stuff that doesn't mesh well. And that scene with Harvey Dent, yeah, I agree. It's like, you know, in the Dark Knight, you know, there was a moment he doesn't kill Eric Roberts. He flips the coin and then turns up the good side. He gets to live another day, and then he flips it again. He does, "Who? Your driver?" Bang, and of course he put the seatbelt on, but then that was, and that's like, hey, I guess that's how Eric Robert died. But you know, hey, that was he didn't. shoot him. In a way, you could say, well, that was Eric Roberts' character's fault, because he didn't wear a seatbelt, you know, and he should have suspected something was going on when he puts on the seatbelt, and then bang. But that
Yeah,
depiction.
that's a great moment. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's a great moment because it's also very much eerily parallel to Batman Begins. You know, the famous moment between Ra's
Mhm.
al Ghul and Batman at the end. You know, I'm not gonna kill you, but I'm not gonna save you either. It's
Yeah,
exactly the same thing
yeah,
with right that moment in the car, right? Yeah, yeah, in
yeah.
Dark Knight. Yeah.
He doesn't kill him, but also he kills his driver, which then causes a car crash, and he quite possibly died. Since we don't hear from him again, that's like the implication, he's dead. So, but yeah, uh, Aaron Eckhart's performance was really excellent. I found it would have been nice if they didn't kill him, I guess, and he was in a third Batman film. But who knows? Perhaps the story line for that, who knows where that could have gone. But then again, it might not have been as good as we might think now. If where it could have gone, like if he was just the main villain. And I know Nolan said that at one point they did think of that, but then they kind of scrapped that because like that's too much of a cliffhanger. Like too much. Like there's going to be a sequel, and they didn't want that. Like they wanted it to be like, if we don't get to make another movie, it's like, well, this gets to endure, and what happens at the end, that's up to you to decide. And they got to make a third film, and then that film, it's like, sort of like it ends with sort of like a new Dark Knight, be it a new Batman, because there's the bat signal is fixed. Um, so there is that implication, but it also, in some of the comics, and like the first Robin, Dick Grayson becomes Nightwing after Robin, and then later on, like if Batman or Bruce Wayne retires or dies, he becomes Batman. So I guess in a way, Bruce Wayne then is retired in The Dark Knight Rises. He's given Gotham so much of himself as Batman and Bruce Wayne that he's able to just sort of step back, and who knows, maybe he'll return to Gotham one day. Kind of like how when Batman Begins, he shows up. Everyone thought he was dead for years, but he wasn't dead. Um, though I guess some would say, well, then I guess the whole thing at the end of the uh, Wayne Manor being a child home would go back to him. Well, he might let that be there for, like, that would be a good use, because he did have a penthouse in the Dark Knight, so perhaps he could live there in the city, or get a new penthouse then, if because he died, so, oh well, we have to get rid of all the stuff he had. Um, and who Yeah, so I guess there's various ways he could possibly come back and possibly help John Blake train to be Batman, or Nightwing, or whatever hero identity he would want to be. um, And one thing about the Dark Knight trilogy I love is also how Gordon gets to have a really great character, and also Gary Oldman playing him really helps humanize the character more than Pat Hingle did a good job, but his role as Commissioner Gordon sort of decreased with each installment, which is a bit unfortunate when the character is excellent. Um, but hey, the Dark Knight trilogy, you got to see the relationship of Batman and Gordon, which is something I really enjoyed. Christian Bale and Gary Oldman's on-screen presence was really excellent, I found. Um, uh, I also just love Gary Oldman. He's my favorite actor. He's somebody who, it took me years to realize that Commissioner Gordon, Sirius Black, and like Sid Vicious, Beethoven, and all Dracula, they're all the same person. Like that's just how good he is. Not just because of the makeup and the voice; it's just his acting. He's just like, it's just so, he has such a great range, and I love people like him. They're able to. become their character.
And I'm so glad you made reference to his appearance in the Harry Potter films, because that was, I thought that was a great use of Gary Oldman, because he could be
Mhm.
a hero or villain. You don't quite know. And
Yeah.
so I thought that was such a great way to use that, and then to realize what the character is versus what is perceived to be in that storyline. And you're
Hmm.
right, he's great in the Dark Knight trilogy. There are some real moments of uh, of genuine emotion. I think for me the 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 one that is like, it could be probably my favorite scene in the entire trilogy. I love the trilogy very much, but my favorite scene is the end of the Dark Knight with the Two-Face confrontation, and it's them in the warehouse somewhere,
Hmm.
and the family is in danger, and the little boy, and he you said that Two-Face, it could have had a story after, in part three, but I thought the
Hmm.
Two-Face story was perfect the way it is right
Yes.
there in that moment, right?
So do
Because
I.
I remember the bit where I saw it in the theater too, right? And I remember the bit in the theater where he what he does is Two-Face, he tests everyone one at a time. So he goes from Batman, and then himself, and then the boy, with the coin toss. It's a chilling moment. It
Hmm.
comes for Batman. It comes up the charred side, so he shoots Batman. And what does he do next? Two-Face. He turns it on himself,
Hmm.
which is the scariest thing. He says, "My turn." And you know that if it came up the other side, he would have done what
Yeah, he
was
would have done
implied.
it.
Yeah. So and I remember I gasped in the theater
Yeah.
when I saw that. Oh my no! Oh, that was the chilling. And then do you remember when, just before that, when, going back to Gary Oldman, when he does that with Batman, and he's like Two-Face is, he's like really almost like tired. He's like, and just shoots
Yeah.
Batman, and Batman just is shot in the abdomen or something. And then
Hmm.
it cuts to Gordon on the ground,
Yeah.
and Gordon looks, and he gives that little, there's a little
Yeah.
bit where his voice is like, oh, and he's like, that's
Yeah.
like, because it's either him or his son is next. And that
Yeah.
little thing was it was perfect, because it said
Yeah.
so much in the moment, and that's an example
Yeah.
of what you're saying about how Gary Oldman is so great. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and he is a great villain, and he's also a great hero, and he's great at being someone in between or ambiguous. You don't know if he's good or bad, and just in whatever situation he's for himself, he's just excellent. And moments like that, I really appreciate him as an actor, and he did help give Gordon more uh, depth in a degree that we hadn't seen on film before. Um, uh, Tim Burton's first Batman, I enjoyed how Gordon was portrayed quite often. Keeping Batman sort of quiet because, well, until they know more about Batman and the situation of everything going on, you're going to keep quiet on that. Uh, and just so much of what happens in that film and sort of that relationship, eventually how that turns out, and how he get the bat signal. I thought that was really cool. I would have liked to have seen more of their partnership in a way uh, in the sequels, but that unfortunately didn't happen as much. Maybe studio interference wanted more certain things, and so they possibly in other installments. But in the Dark Knight trilogy, with Gary Oldman, you gave him an incredible amount to do as Gordon, and I remember apparently, Nolan thought of him as possibly Ra's al Ghul initially, but Gary Oldman didn't really want to be villains as much anymore because he's getting kind of pigeonholed as always being the villain. Like if he's in a movie, oh, he's the guy who you're gonna hate, and he might possibly die or something, or get arrested. And he's like, he kind of wanted to do other things, and so we thought of him as maybe as Commissioner Gordon, though of course he wasn't. He was like Lieutenant Gordon, and then, or at the end of Batman Begins, he was Lieutenant Gordon, and then but prior he was Sergeant Gordon, and so you got this progression of him as up until he becomes Commissioner Gordon, which I also liked how you saw him from sort of uh, low ranking in the police to being the commissioner, and I thought it was really cool because of all how his actions kind of helped got him to the status he became in the trilogy. Um, yeah, Gary Oldman really knocked it out of the park for me. For Gordon, he was excellent.
And I remember too, correct me if I'm wrong, but at the time that Batman Begins was released, one of the things that was really big in the film criticisms and reviews was how Gary Oldman was like a surprisingly great, like, surprising in terms of this turn of a the character that he plays, which is at the up to then was very much not what people were used to, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, he was mostly the bad guy for a number of years because of the 90s. I mean, there were some movies where he was a good guy, or he wasn't. He played a film like in Immortal Beloved as Beethoven. He was, it shows a side of Beethoven we're not totally used to, but because he was deaf and all, kind of explains he might have been rude and might not be seen as a great guy and other things, and see if like of his past to kind of form why he is the way he was, especially later in his life. But uh, yeah, films like that, sort of a mixture. He's not a bad guy, but he could argue he's not necessarily a great guy either. He's just kind of like a normal person that was able to do extraordinary things. Like Beethoven was able to play and compose music incredibly well, and Gary Oldman helps convey that so well that in that film, like, I can't see anybody outside of Gary Oldman in that kind of role. But also in the 90s, there was a lot of like Leon the Professional, JFK, Dracula, even though he was the main character in Dracula, at the same time, Dracula is a monster, he's a vampire, but he's also sympathetic at the same time. And I think uh, Oldman helps with that. And then, but as the 90s went on, he still played a lot of villains. And then in the 2000s, he kind of wanted to change it up a bit. Harry Potter is Sirius Black. First, we don't know. He sounds like he's a bad guy, and then maybe he's not all that bad. And later installments, no, he isn't a bad guy after all. And then Batman Begins, he's like, as Gary almost said, he's the good guy. He's like the guy who wants to do the best for Gotham City, and he wants to actually clean up crime as opposed to officers who either look the other way or sort of get paid off by like mob guys, or forces people to give them money for protection or something. He's not one of those guys at all. He's like one of the like the best officers that the GCPD has. And Gary Oldman is excellent as that character. I really enjoyed his performance in the Dark Knight trilogy, and also knowing how he was a villain for a good part of a decade prior, and then he's now playing parts that he's a good guy. And it struck me how watching the Dark Batman Begins, how I had seen Gary Oldman before. It's just because of how they put makeup on him, or he grows facial hair, or he shaves, or grows his hair out, or has glasses, doesn't wear glasses, or whatever, a little change. He's one of those that just like, he kind of just disappears. And Christian Bale, I haven't really talked much about him, but he's an excellent Bruce Wayne and Batman. And of course, one thing he's known for is body transformation, as well as his vocalization. And a lot of people thinking he was American, only to like, oh, he's British. And you know, prior to Batman Begins, there was American Psycho in terms of his first real dramatic film that helped him get out of the childhood stardom that he had from Empire of the Sun, which is an excellent film. And he was in Henry V and so many other excellent movies. But, American Psycho was a fairly dark film, darker than anything he did before. And that sort of darkness kind of helped him, I guess, probably playing a part like that helped him being Batman, because now he had an experience playing a dark character. And also prior, there's, the Machinist, where he dropped like 100 to 121 pounds or so, and it looked unhealthy. And then he bulked up quite a bit to be Batman, and just in the time span of that's just an amazing feat. And he's done that quite often throughout his career. And of course, it's like, he could have possible health problems if he keeps it up and doesn't manage it well, if he's not careful. But I loved so many people in like the Dark Knight trilogy. Michael Caine, of course, he's excellent. Morgan Freeman, Tom Hardy, Liam Neeson, Cillian Murphy. I remember Nolan apparently was so immersed with Cillian Murphy's eyes that he kept making excuses for him to take off his glasses so everybody could see how blue his eyes were, which I thought was that's quite interesting. And also, his eyes are sort of like, they're very nice color, but at the same time they could be quite evil, especially since Scarecrow is not a good guy, so it's quite fitting for somebody to have like the appearance of a normal everyday guy, but could be very, deceptive. And I like Nolan's casting decisions for his trilogy for who played who, be it the good guys or the bad guys. Yeah.
I agree, and I think that casting worked really well too in his other films like Inception. I thought that
Mm-hmm.
that his appearance in Inception was really good. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so he could have been. Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite a complex character that he's playing, and so.
Yeah.
But no, I agree. I completely agree, and it was and it is a great trilogy, and I really have to talk more about the Dark Knight trilogy on the channel one of these days. Really must, because it's something I admit I'm still working through my feelings about the Dark Knight Rises. But maybe that would be a good opportunity for me to really try to explore it more. But um, yeah, it's a great one, and I know your love of it, and I know you've spoken a lot about it in great glowing terms in a lot of the comments. So thank you so much for that. And I know you spoke about Star Wars and you spoke about Friday the 13th and others,
Mm-hmm.
and so but I, man, I wish we had more time because it's like I don't know. It's my goodness. Wow, the time is flying already,
Oh,
and I think I've only gotten
yeah.
through like the first, I
Oh,
don't know, like 10% of what I wanted to ask you, to be perfectly honest. So
that's a
so let's do this again,
oh
and I want to talk to you more about Star Wars, for example, and also about Friday the 13th.
no, yeah, of
Because
course.
because you said you saw Friday the 13th for the 40th anniversary, for example, on the big screen.
Yeah, that was an excellent experience. That was really cool. There's a good amount of people there. It wasn't a complete full house, but there was a good amount of people there. So it was like just it was a really fun experience to have. I'm glad I had it too.
That is amazing. That is so amazing. Wow. Wow. Friday the 13th. So well, we have to talk about that because I know, for example, you wrote these
Oh,
great comments on each of the videos that I did for each of the films. That's amazing. So
yeah.
I but just what are some of your favorite Friday the 13th films before we
Uh,
go?
four is my favorite of
Which
them.
one? Which one?
Four. I
Four?
love
Okay.
four. I enjoy six, two, one, three. Um, I enjoy seven. I know there are people who don't really enjoy seven much, but I find that fun. A very fun film. I enjoy all of them, even the ones I would say is my least favorite. At the same time, there's always something about them that has rewatchability. Kind of like how Batman and Robin. People say that's not a good movie, but people rewatch it a lot, so there's something about it that it did it right, and that you keep rewatching it. So same with rank perhaps lower. There's still something to watch about them that's fun and always good and entertaining to watch. I really love that series. It's like probably my favorite horror franchise, honestly. Um,
Oh my goodness.
uh,
That we have to talk about that again because in detail because I have to ask you more about, for example, part seven. Yes, that is an interesting one indeed. Part seven, the new blood, Tina, and all that stuff that happens, and yeah, yeah, we'll have to talk about that because that's an important one.
yeah.
So, but Jared, so let us. Is that okay? Can we do this again?
Oh yes.
Would it be okay for you
Whenever
to
you're
come back again?
Yes, yeah. Similar time if that works for you. Anytime. Anytime that works for you. Yeah, could be a certain time, like you know, be at the same time of day of week or whatever. Yeah, all is fine with me.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. So I'd love to continue this, my friend, because as you say, it's your favorite series, Friday the 13th. We just barely even scratched the surface on that. So, um, but
Mhm.
so before we go though, I do want to touch upon a few things. So, uh, you have your YouTube channel and
Mhm.
you're also an author, you're a writer. So, could you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about those for people who might not know about those, or who, as I say, who may be meeting you for the first time? Could you tell us about your book, and could you tell us about your channel?
Yes. My channel is primarily about discussing movies for the most part. I did have some short films I made like in high school with friends, but as life goes on, people don't have as much time to make short films. So, uh, but so I've primarily focused my channel on talking about movies and in terms of like making movies. Uh, I have written a good number of films, but of course, since movies take quite a while to make, that could be some time to you know for any of those to uh, appear on the uh, uh, ever like on the big screen or somewhere, seeing it streaming or maybe Blu-ray. And for my book, I wrote a western. It's called The Wandering Sheriff, and it's a book about basically a bounty hunter is looking for a gang who has killed many people, but all along the way he takes care of possible like potential other bounties because if he's traveling the country and he's a bounty hunter, might as well help uh, places out where there's a problem. And uh, I never really had a complete huge interest in writing a western. I mean, I enjoy western films, but the notion of me writing a western kind of came from watching another YouTuber. His name's David Stewart. He writes books. like mostly fantasy. He's talked about movies and does video game stuff. So he's done a variety of things. And there's a series of live streams he had where it was dedicated to writing. And so he kind of like, if his audience, if they wanted to write a book, all right, do so. Like he himself wrote like a book in a month. Like he's been able to write for a long time, so he's able to do that. I myself wasn't able to. This took me like a year to properly do, like to where I thought this is good and can be released to the public. Um, it's $3, so if anybody is like, well, $2.99 technically, but American dollars, it's rounds up to three. But so, and it's worldwide, so people around the world, if they are interested, can get that. I made sure to put it worldwide because I'm like, I don't want it just to be directed to, oh, it's only American or this. Like, I wanted it to, if anybody worldwide is interested, they can read it. Though, of course, it's English, so keep that in mind. Definitely. Um, One thing I've heard is the dialogue in my book is quite good because I also had a lot of conversations with people in the town that the film is, or not the film, the book is primarily set in. I I I I found I'm good at writing dialogue surprisingly. So that was something when I was writing scripts I was kind of worried, but maybe I'm like I might be like exposition might be a bit much, so I might have to fall back on that. So certain things like that, like certain details in the book I've heard, like good critiques, like good criticism that can actually help and not like, oh, this sucks and not given a reason why. It's just this person didn't like it. Okay, but I have no reason to sort of improve later on. Um, it's also my first book, so it's definitely not going to be perfect. But I'm happy with it. I like it's. I guess it gives a demonstration of my writing in terms of like how I kind of write and I guess my strengths of writing and maybe my weaknesses too and what to work on. So I guess dialogue is something I'm quite good at. I remember sharing some of my scripts to people who wanted to help work with me on my movies whenever that will happen. Last year I was thinking maybe something can happen, but well, that never happened last year, not for obvious reasons, but maybe this year and next year. But I've written various scripts, and I've heard my writing for like dialogue of characters just talking is good. So I kind of try to hone in on my strengths for the most part. So there's a lot of talking, and if that's a problem for some people, I can understand maybe not wanting to get it. Also, I know not everybody enjoys westerns, so that's another thing. I just chose a western to do because something I never thought of doing. I thought it'd be a challenge. Writing a book was different from writing a script, so there's a good amount of challenges there from the beginning, let alone the genre of the book. So that was really fun, though, for me to do. I enjoyed the process of writing a book for a change, and just develop a story that I know at the end would be able to get out to the public a lot quicker than, say, a movie, which can take months or years to make, because obviously one needs money to begin to just the process of getting things set up before you can make a film. Um, and I know because I've worked on other films around Iowa. Um, I've been in some movies with like though they're locally made, and one movie has yet to come out. But I've played multiple characters. Played like a scarecrow. Mentioned Batman, and I played a scarecrow. And this it's like a demonic thing, and souls of people go into scarecrows, and now they're killing people essentially for a farmer who's like a Satan worshiper. So for people who like horror, there's something like that to hopefully look forward to. Like this year, it would be great, but because that film has been in the making since 2017, but there's been various problems. Some people quit, and and that was unfortunate. It's a movie where not too many people are going to get paid much, because of how low budget it is. But um, and also certain details like I probably shouldn't get into because it's like I'm not directing it, so I would. It's best that the people making it should speak on those matters. But I guess for any sort of awareness of any like films that I've done or am doing, there's something like a horror movie. Um, but on top of my Western book, which I actually kind of thought of as I was writing, like as a movie, I could see this as a movie, and the main character I thought of like a kind of a combination of Eastwood's Man with No Name and Bronson's Harmonica, and I found myself listening to the soundtrack to Once Upon a Time in the West quite a bit for whatever reason. That kind of helped me get into my mood and particular mindset of writing my book. Um, but that was a fun experience. So I've mentioned my book on my channel a couple of times. I wanted to make like a dedicated video, let people know because I didn't really tell many people prior to it because it was sort of like I guess a surprise. Like I was just writing it and I just didn't want to possibly get any sort of like any big anticipation and hype. So if it came out and people weren't disappointed, it's like, well, I just wrote this. It's my first book, and it clearly won't be perfect, but hopefully for what it is, people will like it. And I'm definitely happy with doing something like that for like it was a challenge, something that I had never done before. Writing a book. So just that experience alone, I think that kind of helped with my writing. So
That is
yeah.
one that congratulations, my friend. Congratulations. That is wonderful.
Thank you.
And that's something that not a lot of people have done. So really you should be proud of yourself. And as you say, it's a continuation of your art and your expression and your writing of dialogue, for example, and also storytelling in westerns and that genre, and also so you are a film lover, you are an artist, you are a writer, you are an actor, you are a man of many talents, my friend. So, Jared, so I will have all the information in the description box below for people to refer to. And of course, Jared,
Cool.
you have your great channel. So if we want to see you talk about these and other things, films and otherwise, we can go to your channel, Jared Wignall. And also, I want to thank you so much for always stopping by and giving up some of your valuable time today and also in general, because you always stop by and you watch the videos here and you comment and you support me and you support other people. And so you are a really really essential part of this channel. And so I want to thank you once again, my dear friend.
Well, you're welcome, and you make a lot of great videos, excellent videos. You're an incredible, uh, just an incredible person, and so you know, your presence and the way you're able to uh, give your opinion on a movie is very well done, and that sort of helps try to form mine of ongoing, continuing talking about movies because it's like I want to explain myself as well as possible. I'm like you. I don't really do reviews, but just have a good general discussion of a certain movie. I find that flows a bit better for me than sort of giving a film a certain rating because uh, unless it's a movie I definitely love, um, and it could be like, oh, that's a 5 stars or 10 star or however one would be. It's like that. Sometimes they're kind of hard to rate because one's thought can change, and sometimes you might think later on a movie you really enjoyed, oh, I don't like this as much anymore, or a movie you didn't enjoy at one point, enjoy more, and it's like this constant fluxion uh, uh, yeah, of back and forth. So I just try to give my general thoughts on primarily on movies I enjoy, because that's more. I think that's more fun to talk about stuff you like. Um, Talking about stuff you don't enjoy isn't as fun. It's can kind of be a bit of a downer if you don't really have too many positives to say about a film. So uh, I guess it also depends on the movie. Uh, some movies one isn't fond of as much, like some of the Batman entries. You know, there are quite a bit to say about those movies. So I could possibly talk about like Batman Forever or Batman Robin. You know, those aren't as enjoyed as the Nolan trilogy or the Burton movies, but there are a lot of stuff one can talk about like why they're worth watching or rewatching. And even some of the Star Wars installments that people might not enjoy, be it the prequel trilogy or the newest trilogy that came out under Disney. You can look at those and see certain things that even if one's not fond of, you can find something that could be pretty good and worth watching. Um, yeah, uh, and this was a fun experience too. It's cool to talk to you like face to face this way. Hope to definitely do that again. Uh,
Yeah, me too. And this was so fun. And as I say, it was the first real opportunity for me to get to hear more about you. I feel like I know you, but at the same time, we don't get these chances. You know what I mean? So this was a really great time. So thank you so much, Jared. Thank you. And we will talk soon. And we'll talk in the YouTube comments, or we'll talk offline as we usually do. But my dear friend, thank you so much for your time today, to talk with us and to share with us a little bit about your background and your interests in who you are. I really appreciate it, my friend, and we'll continue this very soon. So, Jared Wignall, thank you, my dear friend, and be well. And talk to you soon, my friend.
yeah, you
Thank you.
too. Yeah, thank you, Daisuke. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. You too. Have a great day.